It started with a pencil. One careful line, then another, and before she even realized it, Isabella Grant had sketched a pair of eyes. They didn't belong to her, but they looked exactly like the boy sitting 2 seats away, quiet, gaunt, and always alone. His name was Jalen Brooks, and he had the kind of presence that whispered rather than spoke. That night, inside a modest community art class at the Eastside Cultural Center, Isabella wasn't supposed to be there, not by the standards of her world. Girls like her, born into gated communities and legacy wealth, spent their Tuesday nights at charity banquets or boutique fitness studios. But Isabella? She hated all of that. She preferred silence over small talk, paper over pearls, and she craved the rare comfort of being seen for who she truly was, not for her weight, or her family name, or her father's for. And Jalen never looked at her like she was broken. He never laughed like the others did when she walked into a room. In fact, he rarely said anything at all. But his sketches? They spoke volumes. They were raw and real and impossibly soulful. He always used mechanical pencils, never an eraser. It was as if he believed every line deserved to stay. Every mistake told A. That evening, as class ended and students began packing up, Isabella noticed something odd. A folded piece of paper had been slipped beneath her sketchbook. She opened it slowly. It was a portrait of her, just a few pencil strokes, but unmistakably her. Not the version she saw in Instagram selfies or holiday portraits, but the version she longed to believe in, gentle, soft, open. Someone kind had drawn her, someone honest. And at the bottom of the page, written in clean, tight handwriting, was a single sentence. You look the way you feel when you laugh. Gee, that night, Isabella didn't sleep. But for the first time in years, she didn't hate her reflection in the mirror. In the weeks that followed, the two of them began lingering after class. First for a few minutes, then for hours. They stayed seated on the cold linoleum floor of the art room, backs pressed against the walls, legs stretched out in silence. There was no flirting, no performance, just two people sharing the space between their scars. Jalen told her about his mother, Maya Brooks, a woman who worked the night shift at a care home and sold handmade candles at a flea market on weekends. He never talked about a father. He simply said, "It's always just been me and her." Isabella opened up about the exhausting pressure of being the fat rich girl. How people either pitted her, tried to fix her, or used her. No one ever just listened. But Jalen did. He never tried to flatter her. He asked real questions about her art, her past, her dreams. And when he did laugh, which was rare, it lit up his entire face. She told him that once. He looked away, like he didn't believe it, like no one had ever said anything beautiful about him before. Around him, Isabella felt weightless, like the world had stopped measuring her for once. Jalen Brooks had never been the boy who got picked. Not on the playground, not in group projects, not when it came to love. He grew up in Glenwood Arms, a crumbling apartment complex where the stairs creaked and the ceilings leaked. There, being poor wasn't just a financial condition, it was a brand, a label, a curse. It stuck to his skin, his breath, even his name. People didn't say Jalen. They said that broke boy. Teachers avoided calling on him unless they were handing out detention. Kids laughed when he wore the same shoes 2 years in a row. Some even threw coins at him once in the cafeteria. Still, Maya never let the world see her son as less. You don't have to be rich to be respected, she always told him. Just be kind, be sharp, be clean. But kindness didn't pay for lunch. Sharpness didn't get you invited to prom. He remembered one of the worst days of his life. He was 13. Maya had finally saved up enough to buy him a North Face jacket from Goodwill. It was 2 sizes too big, but she'd smiled and said, "You'll grow into it." Jalen was so proud, so happy. On the way home, they stopped at a gas station. He waited by the air pump, checking himself out in the reflection of a dusty car window. And that's when a white man in a pickup rolled down the window, spat near Jalen's shoes, and muttered, "Still gonna look like trash. Jacket or not." Jalen didn't cry. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at himself one more time and never wore that jacket again. By the time he was 21, Jalen had come to terms with it. Some people were born into banquet halls, and others were born into breadlines. But he didn't resent the rich. He simply never expected them to notice him, which is why, when Isabella looked at him and really saw him, something inside him cracked. She wasn't like the others. She didn't flinch when he said he'd never been on a plane. She didn't scoff when he said his mom sold candles to survive. She just listened. And for Jalen, that was enough. He remembered one night, they stayed behind after art class. They sat on the floor, shoulder to shoulder, legs stretched out toward the ceiling. She looked over and asked, "Do you ever wish you could start over?" He paused. "No," he said. "I just wish I had a fair shot." She squeezed his hand. That night, he walked home in the rain. But for once, he didn't feel cold. He didn't feel wet. He felt hopeful. But even love, when it's fragile, can't erase old wounds. It can only hide them under silk sheets and whisper dreams. Every time Jalen walked past the iron gates of the Grant estate, the smell of old money wrapped around his throat like a noose. The housekeepers ignored him. The neighbors locked their doors. And deep inside, something whispered, "You don't belong here." He tried not to listen. But shame? Shame had a long echo. And by the time autumn rolled in, Jalen wasn't just falling in love. He was falling into a fantasy. A fantasy where the poor boy from Glenwood could finally sit at the table with crystal glasses and linen napkins, not to serve, but to belong. Poverty doesn't just live in empty wallets or skipped meals. It lives in stares, in silences, in the quiet shame of being looked at like you don't belong. For Jalen Brooks, poverty wasn't just a financial condition. It was a weight on his chest, a weight he had carried since childhood. A heaviness that followed him into every room, every classroom, every sidewalk, every pause in conversation where people expected him to prove his worth. He had grown up in Glenwood Arms, a low-income housing complex on the east side of town. The walls were thin, the plumbing MOA, but home was where Maya Brooke W. Maya was his mother, his protector, his everything. She worked herself to the bone at a care facility by night and sold handmade candles on weekends. Her fingers were always stiff from scrubbing floors, and her lower back ached constantly. But still, she made time for him. Still, she smiled. Her hands always smelled like lavender and bleach. Her advice always came in soft, tired tones. "You don't need money to be respected, baby. Just be kind. Be sharp. Be clean." Jalen believed her for a while. But in the world outside that apartment, kindness didn't pay for textbooks. Sharpness didn't stop kids from laughing when you wore the same hoodie 3 days in a row. And being clean didn't get you invited to prom. Jalen learned early that being poor wasn't just a condition. It was a curse that colored every interaction. In school, he was always that broke boy. Teachers barely looked at him unless he'd forgotten homework. Other students mocked him for the shoes he wore, the phone he didn't have, the way he asked for extra packets of ketchup during lunch. He remembered one winter in particular. He was 13. Maya had saved for months to buy him a used North Face jacket from Goodwill. It was 2 sizes too big, but she beamed when she gave it to him, saying, "You'll grow into it, sweetheart." He loved that jacket, until the day they stopped at a gas station on the way home. While Maya went inside to pay, Jalen stood outside admiring his reflection in a car window, just for a moment, just to see himself in something new. A man in a white pickup truck rolled down his window, spat a thick wad of phlegm at the ground, and muttered, "Still gonna look like trash, jacket or not." Jalen didn't respond, didn't cry, didn't flinch. He just stared at himself in the glass, watching his shoulders sink. He never wore that jacket again. By the time Jalen was 21, he had stopped believing he'd ever truly be seen. Not as a person, not as someone who mattered. In his world, people like him weren't guests. They were background noise. But when Isabella Grant looked at him in that art class, really looked at him, it was like the world shifted. She didn't wrinkle her nose when he mentioned that Maya worked night shifts. She didn't laugh when he told her he'd never flown on a plane or eaten sushi. She just listened and smiled. And in that smile, Jalen found something he had never known. Validation. They spent more time together, after class, in quiet cafes, on long walks with no destination. They talked about things they'd never told anyone. He told her about the nights he couldn't sleep, not because of noise, but because of hunger. about how he sometimes sat in the hallway with a sketch pad and a flashlight, just so Maya wouldn't see him cry. He shared how he'd once built up the courage to ask a girl to the winter formal in high school, how he'd spent a week practicing his words. And when he finally asked, the girl laughed in his face. "You don't even have a car," she said. "How are you going to take me anywhere?" That laugh, it stuck to him like smoke. After that, he stopped raising his hand in class, stopped looking people in the eye, started sketching instead. Faces that didn't laugh, lips that didn't sneer, eyes that didn't judge. And Isabella? She told him her own version of loneliness. How people only saw her as the fat rich girl. How no one ever asked about her art. How everything in her life was measured. Calories, trust, even emotions. They were from different worlds, but they were made from the same ache. Jalen began to believe in something dangerous. Hope. For the first time in his life, he thought maybe, just maybe, he could build something beautiful. Maybe love could erase all the scars that shame had carved into him. He started saving. Every tip from the cafe. Every extra dollar from selling his sketches. Coins, crumpled bills. He collected them like promises. Not for clothes. Not for shoes. Not for a car. But for a ring. It was simple. Thin silver. A tiny opal in the center. Isabella's birthstone. No diamonds. No sparkle. Just meaning. Jalen planned to propose on Thanksgiving. He knew her parents wouldn't like it. He knew her world would scoff. But he believed that their love could break through the gates. Maybe, he thought, just this once, the poor boy doesn't get laughed out the door. Maybe I get to sit at the table, not as a waiter, not as a project, but as someone who belongs. He never knew what was already happening behind those polished doors. He didn't know about the pressure Isabella was under. Didn't know about the choice she'd already made. Didn't know how close he was to losing everything. Because while he was holding on to a dream, she was letting go of it. Thanksgiving was supposed to be his moment. The moment Jalen Brooks stepped across the line that had always separated him from people like Isabella Grant. The moment he wasn't the broke boy, not the outsider, not the afterthought. He was walking into the grand estate with trembling hands, a bouquet of tulips, and a ring in his pocket. He wasn't expecting applause. He wasn't expecting approval. He was simply hoping to be accepted. Just once. But what met him behind those iron gates was a cruelty so sharp, so silent, it would follow him for the rest of his life. The grand estate wasn't just a house. It was a monument to money. 3 acres of manicured lawns and sculpted hedges. A circular driveway paved with imported stones. Towering windows that glittered like chandeliers. The air smelled like fresh-cut roses and wealth. It was the kind of home that had rooms just for reading, rooms just for waiting, rooms that had never known struggle or sweat or sacrifice. Jalen stood at the front gate for a moment, trying to calm his breathing. He was wearing his Sunday best, a crisp white shirt he had ironed twice, black slacks, and brand new shoes. His mother, Maya, had helped pay for them. He carried tulips because Isabella once told him they reminded her of spring in Italy. He walked up the steps with a nervous smile, praying it wouldn't crack. Inside, the house glowed with warm lights and colder hearts. Gregory Grant, Isabella's father, barely looked up from his crystal glass of scotch. His suit was tailored so sharply it could have cut glass. His posture was perfect, his presence commanding. Victoria, the mother, extended her hand as if offering charity. Her fingers were stiff, her expression unreadable. She scanned Jalen from head to toe, not with curiosity, but calculation. She asked, "You go to Morehouse?" Jalen replied gently, "No, ma'am. I took some classes at Fulton Tech. I'm working at Janine's Cafe on Piedmont." There was a silence, not the kind that welcomes thought, the kind that punishes it. Isabella reached for his hand under the table, but Jalen could already feel it slipping. This invisible thread of hope unraveling before dessert was even served. Dinner was unbearable. Every sentence from Gregory dripped with passive aggression, every comment with precision-engineered insult. He swirled his scotch and smiled at Jalen. "You know, Isabella used to date a lawyer's son. Big boy from Stanford. Real future ahead of him." Jalen gave a polite smile. "I'm not a big fan of lawyers," he said. Gregory chuckled darkly. Because they cost money? Laughter erupted from one of the cousins. Victoria sipped her wine and looked away. Jalen didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. Later, in the kitchen, away from the table and away from pretense, Victoria pulled Isabella aside. Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut through bone. You know he's only here because of the money, right? Isabella's mouth opened, but no words came. Victoria leaned in closer. Don't embarrass us. And God forbid, don't get pregnant. On the drive back to Jalen's apartment, Isabella cried silently. Jalen didn't ask why. He didn't need to. When they arrived, Maya was waiting by the door with warm cocoa in hand and a shawl folded over her arm. She wrapped it around Isabella's shoulders and called her sweetheart. It was the first time Isabella had ever felt safe inside someone else's grief. Maybe that's what doomed everything. After that night, Jalen started visiting the Grant house more often, though he never crossed the foyer without being explicitly invited. He knew his place, or rather, he knew the place they thought he belonged. He was never treated like a guest, more like a tolerated inconvenience. A stray dog someone kept feeding out of pity. But there was one person who always ran to him. Lena Grant, Isabella's baby sister. Just 1 year old, with curls like a halo and a laugh like falling water. She called him Jay. Every time he arrived, she'd waddle barefoot down the hallway to greet him. She'd hand him books and demand that he read in a deep voice. She'd curl up in his lap and fall asleep to the sound of his humming. Jalen adored her. He once whispered to Isabella, "She's the only person in this house with a clean heart." On some Sundays, the three of them would sit in the garden behind the house. Isabella would sketch flowers. Lena would babble and giggle. And Jalen would sit with his eyes closed, humming lullabies his mother used to sing to him. For a few brief moments, he believed in that world. He believed in a future. But those moments were fleeting, and reality always came back like a knife in the ribs. He noticed the way the housekeepers avoided eye contact, the way the neighbors locked their doors a little faster when he walked past, the way Victoria referred to him behind closed doors as that boy. And still, he stayed, because he loved Isabella. With every piece of him, he loved her so much. He believed love might be enough to change their story. He saved every dollar, every tip, every crumpled bill, all for one thing, a simple silver ring. No diamonds, just one opal, Isabella's birthstone. He had picked the perfect spot to propose. In the garden, by the roses, near the fountain. He had rehearsed the words in his mind over and over again. This Thanksgiving would be different. He told himself that every night before falling asleep. This year, they'd start their own family. This year, he'd belong. But what Jalen didn't know was that Isabella had already made her decision. Not to stand beside him, not to fight for him. She had already chosen the silence. And silence is sometimes more deadly than hate. In his mind, Jalen Brooks had played the moment out 100 times. The garden, the ring, her smile. He didn't imagine roses falling from the sky or orchestras playing in the distance. All he wanted was her hand in his, maybe a yes, maybe the beginning of a life that made sense. But reality doesn't care about hope, and fairy tales don't survive behind iron gates. The night before Thanksgiving, Isabella Grant sat on the edge of her bed, her hair still damp from shower. The soft light from her vanity reflected off a gold-framed photo of her family, posed, perfect, untouchable. Her phone lit up for the third time in 10 minutes. It was Jalen. She didn't answer, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. She still loved him. God, she did. But in a house like hers, love wasn't a feeling. It was a liability. She remembered the night her mother pulled her into the walk-in closet. Victoria was folding a silk blouse, calm as ever. The air was thick with Chanel No. 5 and judgment. "He's beneath you," Victoria said without looking up. "And if you don't let this go, you'll lose everything we've built for you." Isabella's voice trembled. "He's not asking for any of it." Victoria snapped the blouse shut and turned to face her. "That's exactly the problem. He doesn't want to take. He wants to belong. And we don't hand out belonging like coupons." The words were so cold they burned. Isabella stood there paralyzed, her hands shaking, her heart louder than her thoughts. A week later, her father, Gregory, called her into his study. He didn't say much. just slid a photograph across his polished mahogany desk. It showed a man in a crisp navy suit, standing beside a white sports car. Perfect posture, perfect teeth, perfect future. He's from a good family, Gregory said flatly. Knows how to carry himself. And unlike the candle boy, he won't drag you down. Candle boy. That phrase landed like a slap. Because Jalen had once given her a candle for her birthday. Lavender-scented, homemade. The label read, "You're the only light I never doubted." It still sat in her drawer. Unlit, untouched, just like the version of herself that loved him without fear. Then came the moment that changed everything. She missed her period. She took a test, alone. 2 pink lines. Her hands went cold. She didn't tell Jalen. She didn't tell anyone. She walked to a clinic alone and sat in a waiting room that smelled like sanitizer and shame. A nurse held her hand while she signed the termination papers. It wasn't rage or guilt that made her end it. It was fear. Fear of being cut off. Fear of raising a child her parents would never accept. Fear of becoming a ghost in her own life. She told herself it was mercy, but it didn't feel like mercy. It felt like betrayal. That night, she opened her journal, the one she kept hidden beneath the false bottom of her makeup drawer, and wrote, "I see him in Lena sometimes. The way she clings to him, the way he rocks her like she's his. And I wonder, would our child have clung to him like that too?" She never answered that question. Some questions are too heavy to carry. Meanwhile, Jalen was still holding on to the dream. He had rehearsed the proposal, picked out the fountain where he'd get on one knee, polished the opal ring until it gleamed in the light. He kept telling himself, this year will be different. This year will be a family. He didn't know that Isabella had already let go. That morning, she typed out a message. "Come after dinner. Meet me in the garden. I'll tell them. I promise." But she never sent it. She just stared at the screen until it dimmed. And just like that, she let the dream go dark. That evening, Jalen stood outside the grand estate, the ring in his coat pocket feeling heavier than anything he'd ever carried. He looked down at his shoes, shined to perfection, and smoothed the wrinkles in his jacket. He told himself not to be afraid, but he belonged here now. He rang the bell. The door opened. It wasn't Isabella. It was her cousin, a boy in a pastel suit who looked like he'd never been punched in his life. The cousin narrowed his eyes and smirked. "Are you with catering?" "No," Jalen said calmly. "I'm here for Isabella." The cousin chuckled. Bold. Inside, the house was glowing with warmth, but not for him. The smell of roasted turkey. Laughter echoing through marble hallways. Glasses clinking, heels clicking, voices rising. And then he saw her. Isabella, standing in a hallway, speaking with a tall, polished man in a white turtleneck. The kind of man her parents would have chosen for her. The kind of man who didn't carry his dreams in his pocket. She froze when she saw Jalen. "Jalen, what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said. His voice cracked. "I brought something. I was going to ask you something." "Please don't," she whispered. Then came the sound he'd grown to dread. Heels on marble. Champagne in hand. A voice soaked in venom. "Victoria Grant." She walked into the room like a queen entering a courtroom. "Well," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "the stray is back." The room went still. She smiled, slow and cold. "Did someone let you in? Or did you sneak past security like your kind tends to do?" "Mom, stop," Isabella said. But Victoria wasn't finished. "Do you even understand what it looks like, you showing up here uninvited?" She leaned in, voice sharp as broken glass. "Do you know what people are whispering about you and your mother?" Jalen's face went blank. His jaw clenched. "Don't talk about my mother." "Oh, I met your mother," Victoria said, sipping her drink. "Lovely woman. I think I bought soap from her once at the flea market. Or was it candles? Either way, she tried very hard to seem like a lady. But you can't buy class, can you?" Silence. All eyes were on him. Jalen turned to Isabella. She said nothing. And in that moment, she broke him. Not with hatred, not with words, but with silence. He turned around and walked out. No ring, no proposal, no words. Just a quiet man, walking away from a dream he had believed in far too long. 2 days later, his mother Maya Brooks collapsed at the flea market while restocking candles. Massive heart attack. The doctor said it was stress. But Jalen knew the truth. She died of shame, of heartbreak, of watching the world humiliate her son until he broke. At the funeral, only 6 people came. No sabía, no verans, not even a single message. Jalen stood over the casket in the winter wind, staring down at the only person who had ever truly loved him. A promise formed silently in his mind. They broke her. They laughed while they did it, and they will never laugh again. Thanksgiving came and went. The turkey was carved. The champagne glasses were emptied. The chandeliers sparkled. The music played. But Jalen Brooks was silent. He hadn't spoken to Isabella since that night. Her text had turned vague. Her tone clipped. I just need space. My parents are watching everything now. Don't show up uninvited again. Each message chipped away at what little he had left. But the one that broke him was the one she never sent. The one that said nothing at all. And yet, despite it all, he showed up again. Not with anger. Not with a weapon. With a ring box in his coat pocket and a heart cracked so deep it no longer bled, it echoed. He stood at the edge of the Grand Estate, just beyond the lion statues, just below the massive double doors. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden glow across the marble steps. He waited for 20 minutes. His fingers trembled inside his jacket. The box felt heavier than ever. Maybe she would come. Maybe she would see him. Maybe, but she never did. Inside the house, the Grants were entertaining guests. Laughter echoed down the halls. Crystal clinked against crystal. Behind every smile was a secret. Behind every compliment, a quiet condescension. And behind the doors, beyond the warmth, Jalen Brooks stood like a shadow. Unseen, unwanted. He walked away. And 2 days later, the only person who had ever truly loved him, his mother, Maya Brooks, collapsed at the flea market while restocking lavender candles. The doctor said it was a heart attack. They said it was overwork. They said it was stress. But Jalen knew the truth. She died of humiliation. She died from watching her only son be chewed up and spit out by a world that thought poor people like them were disposable. At the funeral, only 6 people came. There was no grand speech, no string quartet, just cold air and the sound of dirt hitting a wooden box. Isabella didn't come. Neither did her parents. Not even a single flower. Not one word of condolence. Jalen stood alone, staring down at the casket, his fists clenched in his coat pockets. Inside one of them, the ring was still there. But now, it wasn't a symbol of love. It was a gravestone for the man he used to be. In the days that followed, Jalen unraveled. He quit his job at the cafe. Stopped drawing. Stopped eating. Stopped pretending. He sold his mother's remaining candles. Sold his old bicycle. Stopped paying rent. He sat for hours in the dark, scrolling endlessly through forums and message boards, places filled with other angry, broken men. He read every post, every manifesto, every rant about injustice and humiliation. He soaked it all in, not like information, like scripture. One night, Jalen reconnected with someone he used to work with, a man named Andre Russell. Andre had been in and out of jail, bitter, volatile, a man with nothing left to lose and no one left to call. Andre introduced him to Reggie Miles, older, smarter, colder. Reggie was a former Marine, dishonorably discharged. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. You want justice? Reggie asked. Jalen shook his head. No, he whispered. I want reckoning. They began watching the Grand Estate, mapping the security cameras, tracking the maid's arrival, noting when the gardener left, watching when Lena, the baby, took her naps, observing when Victoria went to yoga, when Gregory held his Zoom calls in the wine cellar. It wasn't hard, because the rich are always predictable. They think security systems are walls. But walls crumble, and locks can be picked. Thanksgiving loomed again. The Grants were preparing their annual family dinner. Catering, guests, staff, everything would be polished. Perfect, just like last time. But this year, things would be different. Jalen made one thing clear to Andre and Reggie. No one touches the baby. The 2 men laughed. But Jalen didn't smile. He remembered the way Lena used to call him Jay. The way she reached for him with tiny arms. The way she fell asleep on his chest and drooled on his shirt, and he didn't even care. She was innocent. She wasn't like them. She would be spared. The night before the attack, Jalen returned to the old apartment one last time. He lit one of Maya's last unsold candles, lavender and sage. He sat on the floor, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Im sorry, Mama. I try to be good. I really tried." Then he reached into his coat and placed the ring box in his pocket again. Not for Isabella, not for love, for closure, for the ghost of the life he almost had. The hardest part wasn't the planning. It was the waiting. Jalen sat in the back of Reggie's rusted 2003 Crown Victoria, parked across. The engine idled. It was 6:47 p.m. He stared at the glowing windows, the imported marble lions, the warmth spilling from behind the glass. Inside that house were the people who had laughed, who had whispered, who had watched him walk away without saying a word. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Reggie asked. Jalen didn't respond. He just kept staring straight ahead, hands clenched tightly in his lap. In the front seat, Andre was calmly assembling a modified handgun. He didn't look back when he said, "We could just hit the place, grab the stuff, and bounce. No need to go all Jason Voorhees unless you got something personal." Jalen blinked. His voice was calm, cold. "It's all personal." At 7:08 p.m., the power was cut. Reggie had scoped out the junction box 3 days earlier. No alarms, no cameras. The backup generator had a 15-second delay. Just enough time. They entered through the back patio. Glass door unlocked. Jalen had left it that way weeks ago, on purpose, during a visit where he pretended to forget something. He knew the layout of the house by heart. Living room, main stairwell, security hub in the den. Gregory Grant was in his study. The light from his laptop flickered as he poured another drink. "Isabella," he called out, confused by the sudden darkness. He turned around and saw a shadow in the doorway. His eyes narrowed. "Wait a minute. Is that the waiter boy? What in the hell?" Bang! One shot to the chest. Andre pulled the trigger before the sentence finished. Gregory collapsed behind his desk. Blood soaked into the carpet. Jalen stared at the body. His hands didn't shake. Not anymore. There was no going back now. The shot echoed through the house like thunder. Gregory Grant, the patriarch, the king of the castle, was dead before he hit the floor. His glass of scotch spilled beside him, soaking into a Persian rug that cost more than Jalen Brooks' rent for a year. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, chaos. Upstairs, Victoria Grant screamed. Reggie barked orders. Andre smashed a hallway camera with a crowbar. A housekeeper ran from the kitchen. Reggie shoved her into a closet and zip-tied the handle shut. Jalen didn't hesitate. He turned and ran toward the nursery. Lena's room, just like they planned. Because amid all the hatred in that house, there was still one innocent. The nursery glowed faintly. A pink LED unicorn nightlight blinked softly in the corner. Lena, barely 2 years old, was standing in her crib. Her tiny hands gripped the wooden rail. Her curls were wild. Her cheeks were red from sleep. Her eyes, wide, confused, wet with tears, found him. "Jay," she whimpered. Jalen froze. Everything else, every scream, every shot, every plan faded. He rushed to her, scooped her up in his arms. She smelled like baby powder and milk. She laid her head on his shoulder without fear, like she still believed in him, like she still remembered love. He rocked her gently. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he whispered. "You sleep through this, okay?" She mumbled something and tucked her thumb into her mouth. He carried her to the sitting room, the one with soundproof insulation, and laid her carefully on the velvet couch. He wrapped her in a soft pink blanket and kissed her forehead. Then he hummed. The lullaby. The same one Maya used to sing. The same one Lena loved. "Hush now, little dove. Stars are up above." She closed her eyes. She trusted him, and that trust would haunt him for the rest of his life. Back inside the house, Victoria had barricaded herself in the master bedroom. It didn't matter. The door was no match for Reggie's boot. It flew open with a crack. Victoria screamed. She threw a lamp. It missed. "I have money," she shouted. "You don't have to do this." Reggie raised his gun. Jalen stepped in behind him. "You already did it," Jalen said, his voice low. Victoria's eyes locked onto his. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. She sneered. "Of course it's you," she hissed. Couldn't take rejection like a man. So now you're here like a rat. Jalen didn't blink. You don't know what you destroyed. Victoria tilted her chin, defiant. I destroyed nothing. She never loved you. She spat. She pitied you. Jalen's hand began to shake. You were her charity project. Her rebellion. A game. Reggie raised his weapon. Jalen stopped him. No, he said. I'll do it. He looked around the room, spotted a sculpted brass figurine on the dresser. He picked it up heavy cold, and he struck. Once. Twice. A third time. The room went still. They found Isabella in the guest room. She had hidden there, thinking no one would check. She heard the footsteps first, the creak of the floor, the weight of her decisions catching up. The door swung open. Her breath caught. Jalen, she whispered. He didn't speak. She looked older, or maybe just more afraid. Her voice trembled. What are you doing? Where's Lena? He asked. She's safe. Isabella took a slow step forward. Her eyes scanned his coat, his hands, his face. Wait, is this? Her voice cracked. Did you do all this? Jalen's eyes were hollow. You chose them. I never chose, she sobbed. I didn't know this was happening. You let them spit on my mother, he said. You let them break me. I tried, she cried. I tried to love you, but I was scared. They threatened to cut me off, to disown me. Jalen's voice cracked for the first time. I never wanted your money. I know, she whispered. That's why it scared me. They stood 10 feet apart, but they were worlds away. I still love you, she whispered. Jalen closed his eyes. That's the cruelest part, he said. He stepped forward. Isabella flinched, but he didn't strike her. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out the ring box, opened it. Inside, the opal. Simple, beautiful, untouched. He held out to her. Her breath caught. She reached for it, but he pulled it back, closed it, and placed it in her hand. So you know, he said, what you threw away. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She just cried. And then, he stabbed her. Once in the stomach. Once in the heart. She collapsed into his arms, blood soaking his shirt. He held her like he used to, rocked her like he did in the garden. I'm sorry, he whispered. I wanted to be different. She died in his arms, just like his mother, just like the version of him that still believed in happy endings. Reggie and Andre were waiting by the back patio. Their clothes were stained, their faces blank. We clear? Andre asked. Jalen nodded. He turned back toward the house one last time. The lights flickered. The smell of blood hung in the air. And somewhere behind a closed door, Lena slept, untouched, innocent. He made sure of it. They slipped into the night. Jalen ditched his bloodstained clothes in a storm drain 2 blocks away. Reggie torched the getaway car 2 counties over. Andre vanished off the grid. But it wouldn't matter. The investigation would begin within hours. And there was no turning back. At 7:56 a.m. the next morning, Mrs. Naomi Baxter, the elderly neighbor across the street, stepped out onto her porch to collect her newspaper. She stopped. Her coffee cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the bricks. The front door to the Grant estate was wide open, swaying in the wind, and nothing, not even money, could keep death from leaking into the daylight. The scream broke the silence. It came from across the street, from the porch of Naomi Baxter, the Grant's elderly neighbor. She had just been down to pick up her newspaper when she saw it. The door, wide open, swaying slightly in the cold morning wind. No staff, no cars, no sounds, just stillness. And in a gated neighborhood like Peachtree Heights, stillness meant something was very wrong. Within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. At first, the officers expected a break-in. But when Officer Lauren Jenkins stepped through the front door, the truth hit her before her eyes could catch up. The smell, God, the smell. Blood, burned fabric, perfume, baby powder. The house wasn't just quiet. It was frozen, like time itself had recoiled. The first body was found in the study. Gregory Grant, slumped back in his chair, mouth slightly open. A half-finished glass of whiskey still sat on the desk beside him. 1 clean gunshot wound to the chest. The blood had already dried into the carpet. Upstairs, they found Victoria in the master bedroom. She had been bludgeoned, her skull cracked open. The silk pillowcases were soaked with red. Beside her, a heavy brass figurine lay on the floor, still wet. The kind of object you don't drop. The kind you use. The hallway security camera was destroyed. The alarm system had been tampered with. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever did this knew the layout, knew the timing, knew exactly where to go. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found next. In the guest room, lying on the Persian rug, was Isabella Grant. Her arms were wrapped around her midsection as if she had tried to hold something in, pain, blood, maybe regret. Beside her hand was a small black ring box, still closed. Then came the shout. "Got a baby!" Officers rushed to the sitting room. And there she was, Lena Grant, curled up on a velvet couch. A pink blanket wrapped around her. A unicorn night light blinking gently behind her. Thumb in her mouth. Still asleep. There wasn't a single scratch on her. Only a faint smudge of blood on one sock. When Detective Noah Whitman arrived an hour later, he knelt beside the toddler and gently adjusted her blanket. She blinked awake, groggy, dazed. When she saw his badge, she flinched. Then, slowly, she pointed down the hallway with a tiny finger and said one word, "Jay." What followed was a media firestorm. Thanksgiving massacre in Buckhead. Family of 3 slaughtered, baby survives. Ellington Empire falls in blood. Cameras crowded the gates. Helicopters circled overhead. Reporters camped on sidewalks. News anchors whispered about class, violence, and a mystery man known only as Jay. But the truth cracked open not because of technology, but because of paper. In Isabella's bedroom, officers found a red leather journal, hidden beneath the false bottom of a makeup drawer. Her handwriting was neat. Her words were not. Pages filled with longing, guilt, and quiet desperation. One entry, dated just weeks before the murders, read, "I still love him, but my parents will never allow it. They said if I see him again, I'll be cut off. I don't know what to do. Lena keeps asking about him. I miss the way he used to sing to her. God help me. I think I broke him." That was the thread that unraveled everything. They pulled his name, Jalen Brooks. Facial recognition hit on his last DMV photo. They traced phone records, old cafe co-workers, and bus depot security footage. At 2:23 a.m. Sunday morning, a witness spotted Jalen at a Greyhound station in Decatur, arguing with a man who matched Reggie's description. Security footage showed the 2 men walking out of frame together. One frame captured Jalen's face in profile. Detective Whitman didn't hesitate. Bring him in. But they were already too late. Reggie had gone underground. Andre was off the grid. And Jalen? He had returned to where it all began. The flea market was closed. The booths empty. But the candle stall, Maya's stall, still stood. The wooden shelves were dusty. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Jalen stood there for over an hour, not moving, not blinking. He didn't know why he came back. Maybe guilt. Maybe grief. Maybe Maya. When the police arrived, they didn't shout. Didn't need to. Detective Whitman approached slowly. 2 officers flanked him. Their weapons were drawn, but they weren't raised. Jalen turned around. His eyes were red. His face sunken. He looked gone. "I left the baby alive," he said softly. Whitman nodded. "Why?" Jalen's jaw clenched. "Because she was the only thing in that house who knew how to love without a price tag." The trial made national headlines. 3 counts of first-degree murder, home invasion, conspiracy, child endangerment. Jalen refused to plead insanity, refused to speak in court, except once. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he stood. His chains rattled. The courtroom was packed. Lena, now in the arms of a foster mother, sat near the front. Jalens ich mit Hirsch. He spoke clearly. "All I ever wanted was a place at their table. Not to serve. To sit. To belong." He looked down. "They made me believe I was dirt. But love makes dirt feel like gold until it's ripped away. And then you realize you were just their entertainment." He paused. "I'm not sorry I ended it." His voice cracked for the first time. "I'm just sorry she never stood up." And then he sat down and never spoke again. The story didn't end in the courtroom. It didn't end with a gavel, or the sentencing, or the cameras flashing as Jalen Brooks was led away in chains. Because what he left behind wasn't just bodies. It was silence, and a child who remembered everything. Lena Grant, the baby in the pink blanket, was placed in a foster care. Her last name was changed. Her address, her school, even her bedtime routines, rewritten. Her new guardians, the Harveys, were retired teachers. Kind, private, protective. They moved her far from Atlanta to a quiet suburb outside Savannah. They told reporters nothing. But at night, Lena cried, not loudly, silently. She would wake from dreams she couldn't explain, clutching her unicorn nightlight and whispering, Jay. Her new mother thought it was a phase, but it wasn't. One morning, Lena crawled under the kitchen table and began rocking back and forth. She was humming. Not a tune she learned at daycare. Not something from TV. It was a lullaby. Hush now, little dove. Stars are up above. No one had ever sung it to her in that house. No one knew how she remembered it. But she did. At age 3, she drew her first memory. Crayon on butcher paper. A big house. A tiny girl. A man in a hoodie holding a baby. The man was smiling. His hands were red. When asked who it was, she whispered Jay. She wouldn't speak of him again for months. But he was always there. In her drawings. In her silences. In the way she flinched when anyone said the word monster. Because in her world, monsters had lullabies. At age 5, Lena asked her foster mother, if someone hurts bad people, does that make them good? Mrs. Harvey didn't know how to answer. So she asked, why do you ask, sweetheart? Lena looked down. Because Jay only hurt the ones who yelled at me. Her therapist called it dual imprinting, when the abuser is also the comforter. When the villain is the only person who ever made you feel safe. To Lena, Jalen wasn't a monster. He was warmth, and blood, and song, all tangled together. She never wrote to him. But one day, she brought home a rock from the playground. She drew a red heart on it with Sharpie. She placed it inside a shoebox. She labeled the box, his. As Lena grew older, the trauma evolved. By 7, she could describe what she remembered. The glass breaking, the screaming, the warmth on her face as Jalen held her, the feeling of being protected while everyone else was dying. She told it like a fairy tale, one that ended badly, one that still whispered to her in the dark. At 9, her foster parents finally told her the full truth. The names, the deaths, the man. She didn't cry. She simply nodded and said, I already knew. That night, she opened the unicorn's belly seam. Inside, she had hidden a photo. Old, creased, faded from time. It was Jalen, cut out from a newspaper article. She placed it on her nightstand, next to the rock, and whispered, you were bad, but you were warm. And I still don't know what to do with that. At 10, Lena asked to visit him. Not out of forgiveness, not for closure, but because a lullaby had never stopped playing in the back of her mind. The prison allowed a one-time, one-way visit. Recorded. Behind glass. She wore a navy coat and held a notebook in her lap. Her fingers shook. When Jalen walked in, he looked older, grayer, thin, but his eyes still softened when he saw her. He smiled. Not with joy, with recognition. Lena picked up the phone first. Hi, she said softly. Hi, baby girl, he whispered. They sat in silence for almost a minute. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Why didn't you hurt me? Jalen closed his eyes. Because you're the only one in that house who knew how to love without conditions. She bit her lip. Do you still hate them? He shook his head. Hate's a fire, he said. It burns hot, but it dies fast. Ash stays longer. She nodded, then said something that shattered them both. I'm okay now. He smiled barely. Good, he said. Be better than me. She nodded again, and left. She never came back. A month later, a documentary was released. Blood on the Marble Steps, written and directed by investigative journalist Tracy Boone. It wasn't just true crime. It was a dissection of class, of cruelty, of how the world breaks people who don't belong. It opened with a quote from Jalen's prison letter. Monsters don't always growl. Sometimes they whisper, please see me, please hear me. And when no one does, they roar. The film ended with Lena's voice, reading for a notebook. I still call him Jay. Not because I forgive him, but because I remember the part of him that wasn't broken. The part that sang to me when no one else would. 15 years later, few remembered the exact date of the murders. The house had been demolished, replaced by a glass mansion owned by a cryptocurrency billionaire. No plaque, no monument, no memory. But scars don't need monuments to survive. They live in people. Lena Harvey, once Lena Grant, was now 17. A straight-A student, captain of her debate team. Quiet, thoughtful. She always carried a sketchbook. No one was allowed to see it. Every Thanksgiving, she withdrew. The smell of turkey, the sound of crystal glasses. It made her stomach twist. Only her therapist knew why. Inside that sketchbook, there was one drawing she never erased. A child in a crib, surrounded by shadows. One shadow sat beside her. Tall, thin, kind eyes. Beneath it, scribbled in pencil. He wasn't all evil. But even angels can bleed.